In the last couple of years, FCC has created a team called Advisory Services to help farm families navigate farm and business transitions. Offered as a complimentary service, FCC business advisors are available to you across Canada to listen and ask important questions. They can help you start the conversation, define your goals and intentions, eliminate barriers, and explore all of the options. A link to their services will be sent out in the post-event email. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce to you our speaker. We are thrilled to have Dr. Tom Deans with us today. Dr. Deans is a best-selling author, an award-winning speaker, and he has delivered more than 1,000 keynote speeches in over 26 countries and will be talking to us today about the importance of estate planning for farm families. If you have met Dr. Deans before or seen him on CBC or BNN, then you know that he delivers a fast-paced, entertaining, and informative message that we are so lucky to have today. Please help me welcome Dr. Tom Deans.
Katelyn, great to join you.
I am so happy to see you. How are you today, Tom?
Oh, the sun is shining here in the beautiful Hockley Valley, just north of Toronto, out in the country. It's beautiful.
Beautiful. Tom, tell us a bit about yourself and how you started working with farm families.
Yeah, it's a great place to start. I was a business owner. I ran a large manufacturing business for 8 years as CEO, second generation. And that was a business that we ended up selling in 2007. We had an unsolicited offer from a competitor, and we took it. And then I wrote a book. I wrote a book called Every Family's Business, a book that's very different in the world of family business books. It offered a very different message for the first time. And I share in that book 12 questions that help families begin a conversation about how that business will transition. And it's different for every family. There is no cookie cutter solution. I mean, I think that's what makes this subject so interesting. And Katelyn, that was, oh my goodness, that was 17 years ago. And I, as you said, I have traveled to a lot of countries sharing this message. It's a universal message. Family businesses are everywhere, in every country, every one of the 28 countries actually that I've spoken in. Family businesses continue to dominate the landscape. So 90% of family businesses in Canada, 90% of all businesses in Canada are family owned. And I think in the agricultural sector, I think family ownership is even higher. I think it's probably closer to 93, 94%.
Absolutely. So you've obviously gone through transitioning in family business yourself. Talk to us about how you're seeing farm transitions going. How are farmers dealing with this? Is it going well?
I think it's a little bit of a good news and bad news. Let me start with the bad news first. I think it's always been a tricky subject. There's always been some shame, I think, on the family farm when there isn't a next generation, the rising generation who takes over that family farm. I think there's that sense of somehow that family has failed. They've failed themselves or their community or their family. And I think part of what has made my message a little bit different, and I think what's definitely made the book successful, is that it offers actually a different narrative. There's no shame. In fact, I would argue that I think when families can explore in a healthy way whether or not there is the next generation who wants to risk their capital to buy that farm, I think then there is a real possibility that farming family can bring some peace, because it is very difficult. When you've got children on the farm and children off the farm, it is so difficult to strike that right balance between people. It is something that has driven farm families crazy. And I think most people think that they're the only one going through it, when in fact, every single farming family has to figure out, where's that farm going to go? How is it going to go? When is it going to go? And for most, and I'm going to give you a little hint, for most farming families, here's the clue. Here is how they address this subject. That's the clue.
I have a feeling they're not talking about it.
Yeah, I think everyone feels like, well, you know what? It's an awkward subject. If the younger generation raises the subject, they feel like they're going to be seen to be greedy. the senior generation. They don't know how to introduce or start the conversation with their children or grandchildren because it feels like an awkward or dangerous subject. They may learn that no one has interest in continuing to farm. So everyone kind of leaves it alone. They leave it alone, and it really is not a subject that does well when it's ignored. When people move into their 60s and 70s and 80s and yes, 90s, and they still haven't had the family conversation about how and when and to whom that farm business will transition, we know that the outcome is going to be not good. We know that in communities right across the country, half of all farmers are dying without wills. If they don't have a will, then the province has a formula for dividing that farm along with the barbecue and canoe. Like they don't care if it's a small farm, big farm, medium-sized farm, poultry farm, corn farm. The formula doesn't care. In fact, it's the same formula that applies if you have no farm. And I just think a lot of people don't understand what happens when there is no will. It is a long, expensive, emotional, difficult. I can't come up with enough adjectives to describe what happens to the surviving family that has to navigate through the courts and apply for a public trustee to act as the family executor of the person who has died. It is not a good look. It is not a good scene. And so part of the solution was to come up with a tool to help farmers just understand the basics of what an estate plan is. First of all, an estate plan, I don't even like the word. It sounds like you've got these big pillars, these huge gates, or like you got this big giant estate. You can have a bungalow in Etobicoke and you still need an estate plan. This is not about being rich or moderately poor, or it has nothing to do with wealth. Everyone over the age of 18 needs an estate plan. They need a will, a financial power of attorney, and a healthcare directive. They need those 3 documents. And so that's what we're here to talk about. How to get those, what do they look like, and why it's so important to keep those 3 documents up to date.
Right. And you have created a tool for us farmers, and we're going to dive into that in that tool. In the registration for this event, there was a link to the will and estate pre-planning tool. Can you talk to us about that tool and how it relates to farm transition?
Yeah, I'm really excited about this tool because it is, first of all, it has been customized. So it speaks specifically to the unique needs of farming families. So that's the first point that I want to make. The second point is it is going to require people who click on the link to invest a staggering 10 minutes of their life to answer the question, how will all my life's work transition? It is, I say that in jest, it is not a big ask. It is a very, very straightforward, there's 60 questions on the checklist. You just click, 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 and then immediately you get this incredible personalized 20-page report that shows things that you're doing well, and maybe areas of your estate plan or planning where you may need to just close the gaps, make some decisions. This is deliberately called a pre-planning tool because it's not meant to be advice. It is meant to be actually more of an educational resource before you go and visit a lawyer. And I really want to make that point. This is not about going to Staples and getting a will kit for $20. I really want to underscore the importance of getting proper professional advice. Lean on your accountant, lean on your investment advisor, lean on your lawyer for help to implement the recommendations that are included in your report that you get 10 minutes after starting to answer these questions. So it is a really fun, easy to, and I want to say fun, it really is. I mean, this whole subject is loaded with Latin and intimidating words, executor, testator, codicil. No wonder 15 million Canadian adults don't have a will. It's intimidating, and no one likes to feel, not smart. No one likes to feel diminished, right? So I think a lot of people are reluctant to go visit a lawyer and to talk about getting a will because they don't feel like they know the basics. That is
Right.
precisely what the Willing Wisdom Index, what this pre-estate planning tool is doing. It's giving people the basics, and they can read their own report in the comfort of their own home or in the comfort of their own tractor, and really kind of understand, without all the intimidating Latin and million-dollar words, understand what a will and an estate plan is. I'm
Right.
really, really excited about this tool.
Tom, I went through the form today. I took the 10 minutes before we started to go through it, and I have to tell you, the questions that it asked, they were in depth, and there were probably questions that I never even thought to think of when it came to planning my estate. And like you said, when we use the word estate, we think of the lion statues in front of like the big luxury home. And really, it's like you said, if you are over the age of 18, you need to have a will and you need to have a plan. And I think it's safe to say it's not just for you, it's for the people who are here after you.
Yeah, and I think that's a little bit of a misnomer. I think a lot of people think, well, I'll know exactly when to get a will. I'll be in the hospital, I'll be 88 and a half years old, and it'll be the perfect time to get a will. That way I can save my $500 and I don't have to spend it until I absolutely need it. Well, life does not work that way. Just ask Cecil Harris, who is the record holder for the shortest will. He was a farmer, by the way, in Saskatchewan. In 1948, he got stuck under his tractor and died. But before he did, he took a penknife and carved, his will. I leave everything to the wife on the fender of the tractor, and they cut that fender off and submitted it to a court, and the judge certified that as a legal will. Shortest will in Canadian history. That is pretty fabulous timing, but not everyone is as lucky as Cecil. We don't know.
Absolutely.
We don't know what life has in store for us. So you're either early for estate planning or you're really late. And when you're late, the cost, oh my gosh, the cost that you will impose on your family it's embarrassing. The
Right.
$500, $800, $300, it depends on the complexity of your will. The number is so small compared to the outrageous price that happens when your family has to go and hire a lawyer and navigate their way through the local court system to get your estate administered.
Absolutely. So we talked about the information that you're providing in this tool. In today's world, protecting our information is super important. Can you talk to us about confidentiality for a moment? Who is going to see the results from your tool?
Right. I'll make it very simple. Me, but not really me. I seriously, not FCC. FCC does not, the data never lands on FCC's website. No one but myself. I am the proprietor of this tool, but I ask for people to use a screen name. So when I say I see the results, I see the aggregate results. But people do not have to enter their name. Enter corn farmer, Elvis. What else could you enter? Katelyn. Even if your name's Jim. No, seriously, no one cares. No one is looking. No one, there's hundreds of these reports being entered. No one cares. The only thing we ask for is an email address. And, I encourage people to use like a Gmail account or whatever, like something that is, it's anonymous. That's the point. And here's why we made it anonymous. When people really have a strong understanding that it is, no one's looking at the results, no one cares, then I think they will answer the questions honestly. And when they answer the questions honestly, the software, the algorithm will give you really, really accurate recommendations that will help you make better decisions for yourself and for your family. So even though you get a score out of 100, it's not about impressing me, or no one cares what your score is. In fact, some of the best results come from people who score the lowest because they get the most accurate recommendations, and then they can make some decisions as a family and then go to the lawyer. And those meetings with the lawyer are really short. Katelyn, short meetings with lawyers equals
More money
much
in your pocket.
much smaller invoices. So
Right.
that's another real benefit, right? So enter a screen name. John Deere is very popular these days. I have a John Deere tractor. John Deere is very popular. No one knows, no one cares. So that's the quick answer. Confidentiality is assured. And also, remember, you can go back and redo the checklist. And as you start to get a will written and signed and executed and a power of attorney, go back and take the checklist again, and you'll watch your score go up. So it's kind of a little bit of a game. It's kind of fun to watch your score go up as you start to implement some of these ideas.
Right. Well, and what a tool to have, right? To see where you started with your plan of maybe not having anything to slowly going through it and, getting more checkpoints saying you're doing great.
Yeah, I just recently redid the checklist myself. I scored 85. I'm in the business of writing books on the subject of estate planning, and I even, I mean, I wrote this pre-planning tool. I know how to score 100%. I still only scored 85. There's still things that I have to do to improve my score. So this is not about being perfect. It's just about getting a little bit better every year. And I think that when we near the end of our lives and we look back and we think, we had a family meeting. We got out in front and we had really good, open, honest, transparent conversations about the transition of our farm. I have left children that actually like each other because I'm not leaving a mess behind. I have a really good financial plan that is going to allow the next generation to afford this farm because we had a family meeting with our trusted advisors helping us navigate this challenge slowly over time. Like, I
Right.
think there's some real sense of satisfaction that everyone has when we know that we've done our very best to help our family when we're no longer here. I
Absolutely.
don't speak from experience because I'm still here, but I've watched it.
For sure. Well, I'm glad you brought up family meetings because in your book, Willing Wisdom, you talk about the importance of family meetings, especially when it comes to communicating future plans of transition on a family farm. And Tom, the subject of estate planning and farm transition can be emotional and overwhelming. But can you explain to us what happens when families don't have these meetings and we don't talk about this subject?
Well, the quick answer is it would be like getting struck by lightning if you thought you could get it perfect all on your own. Because you'd have to be a mind reader to imagine what people in your family are hoping or expecting for. And I think there's always been a sense that in this country that estate planning is something that we need to tackle all on our own. We need to, work late at night in our kitchen and think about our will and divide up our estate all on our own. And I think part of what I've been doing with my public lectures and certainly with my books and the pre-estate planning tool is to, think, give people the confidence to reach out and say, you know what, I don't know. I don't know what the right answer is for our farm. Um, but I'd like to get you guys together in a room with our advisors present and just talk about what that farm transition looks like. Is it all at once? Do you want to buy a few shares in the farm now? How is this going to work? How are you going to afford it? It's a tricky subject now with the appreciation. It's always been a tricky subject, but it's really tricky now with the appreciation in land values. But I think the families that don't ignore this and reach out and say, I need help, and try to work on a plan and bring some transparency, especially between the siblings, off farm and on farm. Because in the absence of a clear plan, the courts in this country are full of farming families in dispute, fighting over what was decided by a parent who has died, but decided in private and kept secret. So secrecy is not a recipe for success. It is failing farming families right across this country. So
Absolutely.
really requires leadership for the most senior generations to say, let's gather as a family, let's get out in front of this, let's build our plan together. And if that plan includes the farm staying in family hands, great. If it involves selling it to a third party, great. There's no wrong answer. The only wrong answer is the farmer that does
Nothing,
nothing.
right? Well,
Absolutely nothing.
yeah.
It's a
And
disaster.
I'm wondering how your tool can be implemented into these family meetings. How do you recommend suggesting the tool that you've built for farmers? How does one bring that up to their family, and how do you have a conversation about it?
I I think people can do the report, like, so they can do the checklist themselves, and then they can take the results and print it off or show them. It's mobile friendly as well. They can use it on their phone, um, and they can show their parents. They can say, "Look, I got 48 out of 100. It's not perfect. I can see the list of recommendations, and there's about 4 or 5 things I can do that probably get me into the 60s or 70s scoring. Um, do you want to try this?" So you have children forwarding the link to their parents. You have parents sending the link to this interesting tool to their kids, and then everyone can come to a family meeting with their reports and go, "Well, here's what I got. Here's what I got to work on. How are you doing? Do you have a will? What are you thinking?" I just think the tool is just such a great conversation starter. It's
Yeah,
pre-planning. It's not the last word. In many cases, it will be the first word. It's the tool that gets people talking. Just start it. And whether or not that conversation takes a year, 3 years, or 5 years to decide how the farm will transition, it's not a race. It's just that you're started. And I just think, the first step in a 1,000-mile journey is the hardest. It's just getting started.
absolutely. Well, and if I can make a plug for you, Dr. Tom Deans, another great conversation piece. Tom has written amazing books about family business. And I think the more education that we have in business planning and transition planning as farmers, as business owners, as entrepreneurs, I think we are well ahead of maybe where our parents were.
I would agree. I would agree. I think there is something in our culture where we tend to approach estate planning the way our parents did.
Right.
Um, and I think for many people that's failing a lot of farm families. Farms become big business. They've become complex. Farming is incredibly complex. It's finance, it's marketing, it's the science of farming, it's labor, it's hard work, it's managing costs, it's knowing when to buy right, sell right. Like, there's a lot of things going on. And I think estate planning just feels like it's just one more complexity that, I don't know, it was never a real priority for parents or grandparents. So why should it be a priority now? Well, there's more zeros. These are big businesses, these are complex businesses. And as a result, that estate plan absolutely needs to take a higher priority. And here's the best part: I think there's a tremendous amount of satisfaction that someone feels when they start to get things organized. That chaos, this stuff rattles around in the back of our mind. We know it's unsettling. There's no comfort knowing that a farm is going to cause problems in the family. There's no joy knowing that that's what you're going to leave behind. So I think when people take this first step, get their checklist, read their report, meet with a lawyer, meet with an accountant, meet with a financial advisor, build their plan, I think people sleep better. I really do.
Right. Well, I just think of, the folks who maybe don't have all of these things together. And I think about the lack of sleep that you would get from knowing that there are so many things that you don't know what are going to happen when, your will is read, and you don't know what kind of complexities or fights that could happen afterwards. And I think, like you said, you sleep better knowing at night that you have a plan. So Tom, we are done the interview portion of the day, but we have the even more exciting portion of the day of answering our participants' questions. So if you have any questions for Dr. Tom Dean, please put them in the chat here. I have my own list of questions for you that I've come up with, Tom, if that's okay with
Absolutely.
you. All right. So I saw you speak back in 2020 before the world shut down. And one of the things that we did in the audience is people who had a will, everyone had to stand up, and the people who had the will sat down, and the people that were still standing didn't have a will. And I'm going to be vulnerable right here, right now, and tell you, I don't have a will. So my question to you, you've already kind of started answering it, but here's where I want to kind of defend myself. If you are a young person who, doesn't have the farm in their name, or, don't think you have that estate, why do we need a will? Who needs this will? If we don't think we really have that much, if it's not that complicated, why do we still need this piece of paper?
Yeah, I think that's, well, first of all, thank you for that admission. I mean, I think it's really helpful for people. I mean, statistically, half the people on this call today don't have a will. So I think it was a very honest declaration. The will it's not about money. It's not like, well, I'll get a will when I have assets. I'll get a will when I have lots of money. That is not what the will is there for. The will is there to help people who have to administer your estate. We only have to think back to that Humboldt bus accident when so many of those young hockey players were over the age of 18. Their parents were arriving at the local hospital and they were being asked for a healthcare directive, right? So that they could intercede and make decisions on behalf of their children. Well, over 18, they're no longer children anymore. They're young adults. So when you go in for a will, you actually come out with a power of attorney for finance and healthcare. So estate planning is very much about not just being wealthy, but it's very much about the living, regardless of how much wealth you have. It doesn't matter. So this is something for everyone over the age of 18. They need to make this a priority and deal with it like it is an urgent matter. We just don't know what tomorrow holds.
Absolutely. So you talk about the importance of the family meeting. I'm curious, when we're thinking of farm families, who needs to be involved in that family meeting?
Huh. That's a great question. So my advice is always in that very first family meeting is to keep it small and limit it to blood, to family, parents, children. The goal of the first family meeting is to have a second family meeting. In other words, to have a positive experience and feel confident that the family meeting experience was encouraging, like something got done. So keep it small. But I would say that as an aspirational goal, I think it's really great when families try to expand that participation to include the partners of their children, because their exclusion will kind of set a tone about the level of trust in the family. So the first family meeting, keep it small, but second, third, fourth, try to expand that out to include the partners, the wives. We don't involve in our family girlfriends or boyfriends, but as soon as as soon as someone gets married or is common law, and there's a kind of a financial integration, then we would involve them in those family meetings and have them participate as equals.
For sure. Tom, how often should we be having family meetings?
Well, I think to start out with, a lot of people say, well, I'm just going to have one, I'll have an annual family meeting. But here's what's happened. And I have presented in hundreds of family meetings. I have literally never seen one end badly. They are incredibly self-selecting. When families decide to gather, there is usually enough inertia and goodwill for people to go, A, to attend, and B, to go, that was really fun. We actually got some really productive things on the table and discussed. And then what happens is they typically don't wait a year. Typically it's 2 or 3 months, but typically 3 months, and they'll try to tackle another subject. and then maybe another 3 months, and then another 3 months. I would say most families, after meeting 3 or 4 times, they kind of get through their governance issues and they start to move into what I call maintenance mode, where they have an annual family meeting and just make sure that everything is updated, have a good conversation, and then they go for a nice family dinner without their advisors present. So I would say the frequency is higher early on as there's more stuff to do. And then, as I said, move into maintenance mode.
For sure. How do you advise families to keep track of what they talk about in their family meetings?
Well, you'll remember that I'm I really want to emphasize this point. If you're having a family meeting, do not treat this like a do-it-yourself project. You absolutely must have a non-family member there, someone who is independent, someone who is impartial, an accountant, a lawyer, a trusted advisor. Um, it's really interesting how a non-family member will change the chemistry of a room. It will keep the meeting more formal and more businesslike. And I think people just are less emotional, and I just think more willing to deal with the business issues that need to be dealt with in every family. So um, absolutely think about who that might be, and it can be multiple people. You may want to invite your accountant and lawyer and financial advisor to those first family meetings until you start to settle down, and then you can maybe select one trusted advisor for your annual family meeting.
For sure. Those are great pieces of advice. We have a question from our audience here. Tom, what are your views as to whether and how life insurance might be helpful for an estate plan?
Well, it's hugely important. I mean, farms are treated a little bit differently, but there are certain kinds of assets, certainly investments, non-agricultural investments that will trigger capital gains. So what often happens when a farming family has, assets, um, and the farmer dies, and I'm going to say, guys, statistically we die first. Let's imagine that scenario. The assets transition to a surviving spouse, and then that's usually not an issue. It's obviously very sad, but it's when that last parent dies where some asset classes trigger capital gains. And in many cases, there isn't insurance, and the family just cannot find the free cash flow from their business operations to pay their personal tax bill. So they end up losing the family cottage or some other asset, and that's disheartening. So I don't sell life insurance. I don't sell anything aside from my books. But I think, I've attended enough financial conferences to understand that it is a part of a comprehensive financial plan, and getting good advice about what kind of insurance and how much insurance you need is not a one and done conversation. It's definitely a conversation that you want to have with your trusted advisor on an annual basis inside your family meeting, so that everyone knows what kind of liquidity is in place when an estate is triggered.
For sure. I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on sharing your will with the people around you, the folks that you love and trust. There's always the instances where you don't hear about a will until somebody's on their deathbed or afterwards. What are your thoughts on folks sharing their will while they're still alive?
Well, I'm deeply biased on this subject. I wrote a book, Willing Wisdom, that is, very much dedicated to this idea of transparency, and it is a really counterintuitive idea. A lot of people think, if I share my will and people know what they're going to get, then people are going to make assumptions and they're not going to work hard. It will take away people's ambitions. Um, I think it'll probably mean that I won't get great late in life care for my family because everyone just assumes they're going to get lots of money. And so they keep their will secret. And of course, what we do know is that when wills and power of attorneys and healthcare directives are kept secret, and when I mean secret, I mean They're stuffed away under mattresses. Something happens to someone, no one can find these documents. They're locked away in safety deposit boxes, and no one knows that the safety deposit box even exists. I can't tell you the number of scenarios that I've heard where the secrecy around these documents has caused so much confusion. There are people on this call who have been named as executors, and they don't even know it. They weren't asked permission to be named as executor. They're going to find out, and they're going to find out not at the reading of the will, but they're going to find out at a funeral home where the will is first produced, because the executor implements the final wishes. So that's usually when a family is, when they're grieving, that is usually when a family is finding out for the first time if a will exists and who has been named executor. That is not a great way to celebrate someone's life or to begin the administration of an estate. If we haven't even disclosed who we've selected as an executor, oftentimes children that have been overlooked for that role will assume that their parents loved maybe their oldest brother the most, whoever was named as executor. And of course, that may be the furthest thing from the truth. It just may be that that person who was selected is really good with administrative details. Maybe they live close by. Whatever the logic was, no one knows, and people feel aggrieved when they feel like their parents didn't trust them enough to at least have the conversation about the selection of the will and of course, what was in the will and how the farm will transition and who gets what. And it's a really, really deeply complex subject and an emotional subject. And that is why so many people are heading to court, because it's ultimately is emotional. Often people are angry at the decisions that are made by parents. And instead of being angry at their parent who is deceased, they project their anger on a sibling who is perceived to have gotten more. So there is the sense that maybe someone lobbied their parents and got more. And this is not healthy. The only people who are making off like bandits, quite frankly, are the lawyers. They're the ones that are benefiting from the disorganization and the dissonance that is defining family farms.
Right. Tom, we have another question here from one of our guests here. Can you speak to how having a second will can help with probate?
Okay, so by reference to a secondary will or a second will, I think they're probably referencing in certain provinces, there is some benefits of having that second will for your corporation. That's really a technical question, a legal question that would be very, very specific to your farming enterprise and to the province that you live. But it is an opportunity for me to make the point that there is a lot of complexity in estate planning. This and what it goes on in BC is completely different from Ontario. So every jurisdiction has its unique rules and laws. So this is why it is important for you to get local advice. Where your assets are located, you need advice from a lawyer in that jurisdiction. Even selecting an executor who has relocated, who is out of province, or even worse, relocated to the US. There is a huge problem with farming families who have children who have relocated to the US or located to the US, and they're named as executors. You're going to subject those farming operations to US tax law if you don't get good advice. I mean, we could spend an entire afternoon talking about all the peculiar, interesting little changes province by province that will affect in serious ways the tax consequences with the transition of a farm. So all of this to say, get good legal advice. But before you go, complete your pre-estate planning checklist. Use this tool to figure out what kind of conversation you want to have with your lawyers, what kind of questions you want to ask them, what kind of things do you need to do in order to close the gaps in your estate plan that the report will reveal.
There's so many things that you said there. Like you said, there's differences in everyone's situation. There's differences in every province. There's differences in every business. So, but the sound advice here is to use the pre-planning tool to start seeing where you need to go from there. So, Tom, after you've done the pre-planning, you've gotten your report, what's next?
I think, and we kind of touched on it, but I would say, read it. Really read it. The report is written like a newspaper article. So newspaper articles are always written the same way. It starts with a headline. Then the first paragraph is where all the really good stuff in the story is. And then as you start to go down paragraph by paragraph by paragraph, it gets a little more broad and general. So my advice is absolutely read the first 3 to 4 pages of your report. That's where all the good stuff is. That's where your score is, the recommendations, ideas on how to improve your score. But I would really encourage people to really read the full report. It will really give you like a rapid education on what estate planning is specific to farming. I spent a lot of time researching, writing, and making this report really, really unique to farmers. It really speaks to the uniqueness of farming operations and farming families. So once you've got that report, don't keep it secret. Share and compare your report with another family member. Turn it into a game. See who can score the highest. See who can get their score up fastest. Have a family meeting. All of the things that you do with this report is going to help you raise your score. And then do that one important thing. Go and find a lawyer that specializes in estate planning. And by specialized, I don't mean does real estate in the morning, divorces in the afternoon, and some other kind of law later in the day. I mean the lawyer who does estate planning all day long. This is an incredibly complex area of the law. It is constantly evolving. So do your research. Ask other farmers in your community. Who did they use? What was the experience? Was the lawyer using plain language? Did the lawyer intimidate you or impose their own personal views on what should be in your will? Or was the lawyer easy to work with? Did they provide fair value for the work that they did? Were they reasonable? Approach the selection of a lawyer like you would approach the selection of any vendor, whether it's seed or any other input. Give it the same kind of rigor. And then once you settle on that lawyer, book that appointment and go in and really, really feel good about the decisions that you make.
That is a step-by-step. That's a checklist that I think we can all do for sure. Tom, I have one last question that I want to ask you. If anyone in the audience wants to pop in their questions, we still have a few more minutes, but we talk about, I think it's really easy to sometimes talk about the horror stories that we hear when it comes to estate planning and farm transitions. But can you share with us any feel-good stories that you've been able to be a part of and plans that have made farmers really proud?
Yeah, this was not a setup question. I did not know you were going to ask me that question, but I actually heard a really fascinating story recently. A farming family, one child on the farm, one child off the farm. Child off the farm, super accomplished in the area of finance. Parents decide that they do the checklist, they get a score. They want to raise their score, and the one way of doing that is to have a family meeting. They convene a family meeting and they say that, look, we want to transition the farm. What do you guys think? Are you ready for this? The sibling on the farm loved farming, but didn't really gravitate towards the business end of it, didn't really like the stress of finance and all of that stuff, but loved farming. The sibling off farm loved the idea of keeping the farm in family hands and said that he wanted to purchase the farm at full market value based on a third-party valuation and continue to hire his brother to run the farm. He would remain a passive investor. Now, how cool is that?
I just think, it just speaks to that farming is such a dynamic business. We might not be really able to operate or fix a tractor, but if you can read a financial report, you belong on the farm, right? We need those skills everywhere in business. So that's great. There's one last question here. Can you comment on the choice of executor? How do you choose?
So here, I love this question. And what a great way to wrap up, because the family meeting becomes a perfect forum to resolve the answer of that question. So again, compare that to the person who sits down at their kitchen table 11 o'clock at night and goes, okay, I got to make a decision. Who's going to be my executive? And they got to figure out the perfect answer all by themselves. As opposed to a family meeting, can you imagine mom and dad sitting around a kitchen table saying, look, with their advisor present, saying, here's our first family meeting. Your mother and I are going to be traveling together to Florida. We're going to be on the same plane together. We need to update our will. And instead of just proclaiming who our executor is going to be, we thought that we would get you guys together in the room. We've also asked our advisor to come and just give a 10-minute presentation on what the duties of an executor is. Like, what does it mean to be an executor? And then after we have the presentation, let's kick it around as a family and see what the best decision is. So my quick answer to your question, Katelyn, is I have no idea who the best executor for you is. It's not like there's a cookie cutter answer that gets one person. I've heard there's a myth out there that says you should never have even number of people. You should have either 1, 3, or 5 executors so that there's a tiebreaker. I'm like, tiebreaker for what? I mean, really, if you're doing what I'm talking about in the tool, there is no need for votes. There's been lots of ample family conversation and no voting going on. There's just executing the wishes that are laid out in the will. So my quick answer is the answer is always in the room. When you assemble your family and ask the question, who should I select as an executor? The right answer is in the room. Maybe all of them, maybe none of them. Many families are hiring non-family trustees, trust companies, to perform that role. So there it is. The quick answer is I have no idea.
That's the perfect answer to end the day with their Tom. Thank you so much for everything today. You have created such a useful tool for farmers to use to make this transition not as difficult as it needs to be. We can use this tool to plan for future generations and to keep on farming. So thank you so much for all of your wisdom today. And it has been such a pleasure chatting with you.
Katelyn, don't thank me. Just put me in your will.
Will do. Will do. Thank you so much, Tom.
Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.